Well, that's a sad sight. Okay, to address the elephant in the room before we get started, the reason my background looks so bare bones is because I'm on the cusp of moving house. You can't see it, but surrounding me on all sides are enormous cardboard boxes. Everything has had to be packed up, save for what little I could salvage for now. It is definitely sad, but this background has served us very faithfully now for the last 4 years. So I salute this background, but it is time for something new. So hopefully we won't have to suffer through this rather empty look for too long. Of course, I had to keep certain items out, like, for example, 13 Blades, which is basically my favourite supplementary Bleach cover ever. But yeah, just wanted to address that before diving into the video. Thanks everyone, and enjoy the latest battle analysis. In our last battle analysis, I spent nearly an hour gushing about Komamura and Hisagi versus Tosen, a fight that I consider to be one of Bleach's very best. It comes towards the end of the Bankai arc as the Fake Karakura Town battle rounds the bend into its final third. The Espada have all been defeated, and now it's time for the main event. In the grand scheme of things, Tosen is dealt with surprisingly early on in my opinion, with his death opening the floodgates for the arrival of Ichigo and the subsequent showdown with Aizen to really begin. And today we're going to continue down that narrative path with another major battle that comes at the close of the Fake Karakura Town arc. Perhaps, though, the weirdest fight of the lot. Ichigo versus Gin feels like a fight that should be an enormous deal. One of the most popular villains of the entire series is about to duke it out with our main character, a grudge match in the making since their first clash at the gates of the Seirete over 350 chapters ago. And yet, there's something strange in the air about this entire encounter. For starters, neither character is really giving it their all. The circumstances surrounding the fight are of course taking their toll. Gin realises that time is quickly running out, faster than he had anticipated. Aizen's guard is currently down, but soon he'll be much too strong to kill at all. And yet Ichigo, currently wallowing in a crushing feeling of despair, isn't in any shape to take Aizen down. So Gin needs to spend what little valuable time they have preparing Ichigo for the great battle to come, or simply killing him outright if he's not up to the task. Meanwhile, speaking of Ichigo, he just isn't focused. This fight doesn't really matter to him at all. Aizen is currently taking on Ichigo's father, Isshin, and it's clear that's where Ichigo would rather be. Especially once Aizen begins to ascend and Kisuke and Yoruichi join the fray. A few choice words from Gin, however, as well as watching Aizen work, rattle Ichigo to his core. There's just so much at stake here. How can they possibly win a battle they simply can't afford to lose? But Ichigo's characterization is a little all over the place in this fight too. There are times where his mentality and focus are restored, only for it to shatter to pieces all over again in a matter of chapters, or even what feels like pages. That's not to say, though, this is a bad fight by any means. In fact, I actually quite like it. It's just an odd one. It's a fight that feels like it doesn't quite belong, like it doesn't have a place within the narrative. Both characters are looking elsewhere from start to finish. In a sense, that's actually pretty cool. They're fighting because they feel they have to, and eventually that veneer is dropped somewhat. I'm excited then to dive into Ichigo vs Gin primarily for its character work, but there is more to it than that. It has a couple of instances of cool action, including one little set piece with some very nice choreography, and of course it features the reveal of Gin's Bankai, Kamishini no Yari, possibly the single most anticipated Bankai reveal of the arc. And so my big question where this fight is concerned is twofold. What did Kubo want to get across with this fight, and did he deliver on what he set out to achieve? And was this fight a worthy final battle for Gin Ichimaru, a character who up until now has by design done virtually nothing of note throughout the entirety of the Fake Karakura Town arc, leaving fans hungry for just about anything from him. Gin's most prominent motif is of course that of a snake, someone who waits in the undergrowth, slinking and stalking his prey before springing out with a devastating strike for maximum impact. We see that mantra brought to life when he cleaves Hiyori in two out of nowhere, and so fans had been waiting anxiously to finally see Aizen's right-hand man in the spotlight, to see what he might do next, what move he might make. And so here it is, our battle analysis of Ichigo Kurosaki versus Gin Ichimaru in the Fake Karakura Town Arc. Let's see what Kubo had in store for both of these characters, two warriors with their sights set on a higher goal. With the recent defeat of essentially the entire Gotei 13 at the hands of Aizen, the Battle of the Fake Karakura Town Arc has truly been whittled down to its final few combatants now. It's feeling oddly empty in fact, nothing but a war-torn wasteland in its wake. With this fight taking place at such a late stage of the war, after even the likes of Yamamoto have been taken out, it really lends it a feeling of serious importance compared to many of the battles that came before. And of course, any fight that features Ichigo in such a prominent role is going to feel like a big deal. Why wouldn't it? Almost every battle Ichigo has endured during not just this arc, but every arc to date has felt like a major milestone moment for both the character and the narrative. Will we be able to say the same about this one too? Truthfully, it begins like any other fight in a fairly typical fashion, with both characters squaring off, having moved a fair distance away from the other bigger fight taking place at the same time. And I think that right there is just one of the many elements to this battle that make it stand out to me as feeling so weird. Ichigo might be about to fight Gin, yes, but there is no denying this is not the main event. For during the Fake Karakura Town arc, the narrative of Bleach doesn't follow Ichigo, nor is it truly propelled by him. It is pushed forward by Aizen. He is the momentum driver. Therefore, the battle that involves Aizen is the one that holds greater prominence within the narrative at the time. Ichigo versus Gin feels extraneous by comparison, which is exceptionally odd for a solo fight involving the main character. There's a sense that Ichigo has been sent to fight Gin, so the adults can have a talk over here in the meantime. Again, I feel like I sound as though I don't enjoy the fight, but that's just not the case. I do, but it simply cannot be discussed in any meaningful way without first acknowledging how strange its layup is from the offset. Unlike Tosen's fight, which was criminally short, Ichigo vs Gin is actually surprisingly long from a chapter standpoint, with a chapter lifespan running from chapter 398 to chapter 406, that sounds like a lot of dedicated panel space. But in reality, Ichigo vs Gin is very broken up, though once again that's by design, with Kubo choosing to place the majority of the spotlight on whatever Aizen is engaged in at the time. This fight definitely plays second fiddle. Both fights do mesh together in a way that feels natural, however, with Ichigo vs Gin popping up at points throughout, both to remind you that they're still there, but also to provide a fresh outside perspective on Aizen's ongoing showdown. Ultimately, what's really cool about Ichigo vs Gin, though, is the subtext, the nuance. It's a remarkably introspective battle as Gin sizes Ichigo up throughout their duel, only pushing him as far as he needs to at any one time. Despite Ichigo's incredible power and skill, Gin is in control for the entirety of the battle. I think it's pretty clear that Kubo both liked Gin a lot and knew the fans liked him too. In my opinion, it's fairly obvious that Gin is well respected by the narrative, allowed to remain on top of his game until the very end. And that doesn't come for a while for Gin either. It feels like Kubo wanted to keep him alive as long as possible until it simply became untenable. Of course, this entire fight is a prelude to Gin's ultimate fate and sows the seeds for what's to come for the character in the end. Regarding who's involved in this fight, well, it's a simple one. It really is just Ichigo versus Gin throughout, which is quite refreshing, though as mentioned earlier, their battle does intersect with Aizen's showdowns, both with Isshin and then later Kisuke and Yoruichi also. Ichigo and Gin are interesting in that they at least have some history together, as fleeting as it may be. Gin was the captain that met them at the gates to the Seirete at the start of the Soul Society arc, and Gin was the first real demonstration of a captain's power outside of Byakuya from the arc prior, that is. But crucially, Gin was also the first time Ichigo really witnessed a captain's cruelty too, leading Ichigo to dive headfirst into battle against the Sly Fox. Ichigo's relationship to the three main villains of the Bankai arc is an odd one indeed. Ichigo has absolutely no connection to Tosen whatsoever. In fact, Tosen is the only captain from the Soul Society lineup that Ichigo never actually speaks to once in the entire series. But that's fine. Tosen's relationships are tied more intrinsically to the Gotei anyway. And with Aizen, Ichigo's relationship has always felt mostly duty-bound and almost businesslike. As Aizen himself says, Ichigo has no real reason to hate him, though I've always disputed that. Aizen's determination to wipe out Karakura is surely reason enough. And Aizen always felt, to me, a lot more out of Ichigo's reach than some of his earlier rivals and antagonists, like Renji, Grimmjow, and even Ulquiorra. But with Gin, the feeling is definitely different. There's a sense that these two are standing on much more even ground. Of course, it is fascinating to see someone like Ichigo, who is honourable by nature, coming up against someone who is so duplicitous by nature, someone so sneaky and conniving. Returning again to our comparisons with the Ranka, one thing you'll notice is that they always wear, for lack of a better term, their hearts on their sleeves. Hollows are base creatures driven by instinct. It's the Shinigami who are the schemers. Anyway, as we move on to the actual fight itself, some pre-fight context first to set the stage for the battle to come. After the fall of Yamamoto, it appears there is no one left to stand in Aizen's way but Ichigo, who desperately throws himself into battle without a second thought, hoping to wound Aizen as best he can before the villain can collect himself and prepare a defense. Although Ichigo is marginally successful, actually landing a pretty massive hit on Aizen in one of my favourite sequences of pages in the series, it is simply not enough, with the battle threatening to rage on. Just as Aizen begins to rattle Ichigo with the so-called truth that all of his fights and growth until now have occurred in the palm of Aizen's hand, Isshin appears on the battlefield in a shocking cliffhanger moment, Ichigo startled to see his father dressed as a Shinigami before him. As Isshin puts some distance between them and Aizen, he and Ichigo begin to talk. While Ichigo obviously has some questions for his father, for the time being he's more than willing to let them lie. Ichigo has matured a lot, and falls back onto some words of comfort that Rukia gave him once during a similarly trying time. A way for Ichigo to show that he cares, that he's interested in the truth, but that he doesn't want to step on his father's toes, so to speak. He doesn't know how to ask Isshin about all of this without disrespecting him, so instead he'll simply wait until Isshin himself feels the time is right, which coincidentally wouldn't be for, what, like another 150 chapters or so. But it's a nice moment between father and son. Ichigo and Isshin's relationship has been built on a foundation of silly moments, of Isshin's over-exaggerated goofiness and the comedy that comes from it, but the best writing between the two of them always flows from the quieter points. Regardless, Ichigo thanks Isshin for hitting him back when he first arrived. Before that, Ichigo had been spiralling uncontrollably due to Aizen's words. There's a sense that Aizen is practically the devil himself, that allowing him to speak for too long is in itself a weapon, that his silver tongue is dripping with poison. Can't For Your Own World plays this idea up even more in one of its cooler moments, with Kyoraku reticent to allow anyone to listen to Aizen for too long. But now with Isshin's help, Ichigo claims to be back, and motivated to take the fight to the villains once more. I wanted to highlight this because Ichigo's mental state is all over the place within the span of just this volume. Ichigo is often depicted as someone who slips into mental anguish but can be rescued from it by choice words words and actions from those closest to him, but this almost feels a little like parody here. Ichigo is back on his feet again, depicted with a huge proud panel and everything, but only a few chapters later, the state of the battle and the realization of Aizen's power mixed with Gin's words is enough to bring him tumbling back down again to a position even worse than he was in before this. Anyway, as Aizen and Gin converse briefly, Ichigo suddenly rises up behind Gin, diving through the air and locking blades with him. At the same time, the corner of the building that Aizen is standing on is severed, carved away from the rest of the tower block in a huge slash as Isshin confronts him. I've always thought this is a really overlooked but awesome moment. Isshin and Ichigo clearly come at them both with a plan to separate the two villains from one another, with Isshin obviously believing he can take down Aizen while Ichigo battles Gin. What we don't know is whether or not Isshin knew that Kisuke was on his way yet. I'm assuming he probably did, and so really is just buying time for now. Anyway, as Isshin and Aizen lock blades across the battlefield, Ichigo and Gin touch down elsewhere amidst the rubble of Karakura. One thing that's cool about this fight is that it actually takes place mostly on ground level, which is something we haven't really seen before in the Fake Karakura Town Arc, certainly not from the big players anyway. But with Ichigo sliding to a halt as Gin daintily lands on the ground, the two of them face off, Gin's coat billowing in the wind as he holds his Shikai out to the side, musing that it's been a while since they last fought. I have to say right off the bat that I adore this panel of the two of them facing down like this. I love a good face-off panel as it is, and this is one of my favourites. But as Gin tells Ichigo that he won't hold back this time, we get probably one of the biggest cliffhangers of the Bankai arc itself as Gin activates Bankai, starting the fight for real. Except not quite, because Kubo employed this weird narrative trick where the battle was beginning in media res last chapter, likely for the purposes of the cliffhanger ending. Instead, when we return to the fight in chapter 399, Ichigo and Gin are simply talking to one another as though they've gone back in time before Gin activates his Bankai. In a lovely artistic shot, Gin is silhouetted in the foreground as Aizen's colossal Raikoho blast of yellow lightning illuminates the cityscape behind him. By the way, this chapter, the one where we first see Gin's Bankai in action, is the first to be called Deicide, in a neat little piece of foreshadowing. And that's really awesome because it means for the entire slate of Deicide chapters to come, Gin's Bankai, the god-killing spear, is active the entire time. But Gin starts by asking Ichigo if he remembers the last time they fought, way back in the Soul Society arc. When Ichigo professes not to remember, Gin cuts him off, calling him a liar and wondering if he's trying to insult him. But Ichigo says that while he does remember clashing with him in the past, what he doesn't remember is Gin's heart. Here, Kubo begins to employ this idea that Ichigo can read the hearts of those he fights, so to speak. As Ichigo explains it here, it's not something that he does consciously, and it usually only dawns on him once the fight is done. Now, I'll be honest, this is a concept I've never really been a huge fan of. It comes out of nowhere, essentially, first mentioned here in this fight, despite us being almost 400 chapters deep into Bleach, and with Ichigo having fought countless major battles until now, with no real evidence of this cropping up at all in the fights prior. It's a flimsy idea at best, and felt to me like a quick way for Kubo to hint at a possible incoming betrayal by Gin, with Ichigo saying that ever since they fought originally, Gin was never looking at him. But what Gin's true target is, Ichigo isn't sure. Of course, it's obviously Aizen, and it was pretty obvious back then too, but having Ichigo suddenly be able to read the hearts of those he fights is a somewhat clunky way of getting that across. It's used a little more effectively, in my opinion, during the Lost Agent arc to convey a similar thing, that Ichigo doesn't trust Ginjo. But with a terrifying smile plastered on his face, Gin says that Ichigo is a creepy kid before quizzing him on his Zanpakuto Shinzo. As Gin asks Ichigo if he knows how far it could extend, Ichigo scoffs that he hasn't come here for a game. Gin reveals that Shinso can extend up to 100 sword lengths, before asking about his Bankai next. As Ichigo, though, seems unwilling to play along with Gin's trickery any longer, Gin simply decides to show the boy his Bankai instead. And so we're back to the end of chapter 398. One of the best things about Gin as a character is that he doesn't play by the rules of shonen, as we'll see many times throughout this fight. In that way, he does remind me a lot of Askin. They both seem hell-bent on subverting the conventions of their very own genre, as though they're aware they're in a story themselves. As Gin activates Bankai, telling Ichigo it extends 8 miles long, Kubo puts an immense amount of work into even the activation page itself. It's easily the coolest Bankai activation in the series, in my opinion, in terms of its exquisite paneling. Hunched over, Gin is barely visible in the top right corner of the page, but the word Bankai rolls off his tongue like a hiss, as emphasised by the flowing speech bubbles that seem to slither down the page. We then get an awesome shot of his face, his eyes open again at last, as Gin reveals the name of his weapon, Kamishini no Yari, or the God-killing spear, as he whips his arm upwards, the panel seemingly slicing upwards to follow the motion of his arm. It's brilliant stuff. This is followed quickly by a huge landscape shot of Karakura Town's skyline, the buildings all split in two as Gin's sword cleaves through them all. It's simple but very effective and looks amazing. On the next page though, we see the Bankai itself in a clearer, more explicit light. Gin stands at the epicenter of this destruction, as buildings come raining down around him, the man wielding his colossal weapon. The artistry on display here is no doubt immaculate, with Kubo conveying a wonderful sense of scale. Gin swings his sword around him in an impressive showcase before flinging the blade towards Ichigo next instead, an arc of blistering white screaming towards the boy. Ichigo lifts his own sword to block Kamishini no Yari, the massive blade forcing him back across the rubble-strewn ground. As Ichigo manages to bring Gin's Bankai to a halt, however, a surprised Gin looks on as an injured Ichigo then unleashes a Getsuga Tensho, sending the wave of black energy back down towards Gin himself. As the blast collides with Gin in an explosion, the grinning villain emerges from the smoke, both he and Ichigo now sporting bloodied wounds on their foreheads. Now, I want to be totally upfront and honest about my feelings regarding this fight, as I always am. Back in the day, I was unbelievably disappointed that this was Gin's Bankai. I'm serious, it was bad. It took a lot for me to be disappointed in Bleach. It was the series I loved so much, and while plenty of people took to the forums every week to put it down, I was an enjoyer pretty much no matter what. But I can't lie, I was gutted that this was seemingly it. Gin was one of my favourite characters in the series, even with his importance diminished over the years, and Shinso's Bankai was something I had been dying to see. Now, is it my fault for letting my imagination run wild in that week break? Of course, to a degree. And it's also my fault for taking the Bankai of a notoriously sly character at face value, while also judging it on only a single chapter. Hey, I was young, but compared to virtually every other Bankai we'd ever seen, this just seemed terrible and basic. Shikai and Bankai are linked, of course, and Bankai is often just a bigger, more blown-out version of the Shikai, but this seemed to be taking that to a very literal degree. I remember just sitting there really wondering if this was it. Gin's Shikai extends his sword a lot, and his Bankai just is an even longer sword, I guess, to an almost comically unusable degree. But of course, I was being played for a fool. Kubo got me hook, line and sinker. And that's actually what I love about this Bankai and the way Kubo depicts it. It's like no other Bankai in the series. It starts out seemingly pretty plain, but Gin unravels more and more wrinkles as time goes on until it suddenly becomes something surprisingly deadly. But even after all of that, nothing we learn about Gin's Bankai is actually true either. Gin is the ultimate unreliable narrator, and the slow drip feed of Kamishini no Yari is handled in a very clever way. but we'll get to that. As a milestone chapter 400 begins, we briefly see Rangiku through the thickening smoke. As she blinks open her weary eyes, she catches sight of Gin. And it seemed likely to me that Kubo was teeing up Gin's eventual defeat here by bringing Matsumoto back into the fray after she'd been absent for an awful lot of chapters. It seemed likely, as I mentioned in my Komamura and Hisagi vs Tosen analysis after seeing Hisagi kill Tosen, someone who of course looked up to Tosen and felt like they were very special to them. It felt likely to me that Kubo was once again setting up someone very special to Gin, being the one to eventually bring him down. Though admittedly that idea had already been broken open somewhat by Hinamori having been brutally taken out by this point already, but it still kind of looked like that was where we were headed. Anyway, as we move on, Gin muses that Ichigo is dangerous and needs to be taken out quickly before he becomes a real problem. Suddenly, Kamishini no Yari is tiny once again, returning to its original state in the blink of an eye. This isn't the same as Gin's Shikai, where you actually see Shinzo retract as it takes a few seconds to return to its normal size, like a snake slithering away into the grass again after striking. Here, you blink and the Bankai has retracted. Immediately, I remember softening on the Bankai right away, thinking that new element added a very dangerous ripple to the weapon, and of course played greatly into Gin's serpentine motif, reinforcing the notion of swift, sudden biting strikes that launch unpredictably. As a terrified Ichigo realises he can't see the sword's retraction as it's way too fast, Gin ponders what to do next in a very casual, laid-back manner. Deciding to take Ichigo on the old-fashioned way, Gin lunges for him. This is another exceptional panel in my opinion. By having Gin hang his head in such a way, Kubo makes him look inhuman and downright eerie, while also conveying the extreme speed at which Gin is suddenly springing forward. It really is fantastic. Ichigo readies himself, however, and the two clash, with Gin striking and rapidly jabbing away at Ichigo with the short version of his sword, sparks flying as the two blades smash back and forth. As they fight, Ichigo correctly deduces that Gin hasn't disengaged his Bankai. All that's happened is the Bankai has shrunk back down to the size of Gin's regular Shikai, meaning Gin is free to unleash the Bankai's full size at any moment at a lightning fast speed. Speaking of which, Gin breaks away from Ichigo all of a sudden, leaping above the boy, seemingly about to bring his blade down upon him. As Ichigo looks up, reacting slowly to Gin's moves, Gin instead lands and darts to the side, feinting Ichigo before sniping him through the shoulder with his massive blade, releasing it in the blink of an eye. Gin tries to then bring the blade downwards in an effort to remove Ichigo's arm, but the boy is able to pull himself free and escape to the side as a wall of dust rips through the Karakura landscape where Gin's miles-long Bankai is now diving into the earth. Ichigo then makes a mad dash for Gin, spotting an opening while the villain's blade is still extended. But as Ichigo reaches him, bringing his Zanpakuto up to Gin, Kamishini no Yari is already shortened, the two locking swords once more as Gin then flips over Ichigo, unleashing his Bankai's full size again before landing out of harm's way. Yeah, it's an excellent piece of choreography. Again, seeing Gin's Bankai on display like this works wonders. I love the shot of the skyline of Karakura completely subsumed by the crash of Gin's Bankai in the background. The massive sword moves like a great snake, hidden from view but there nonetheless. However, Ichigo thinks he's now got Gin figured out, telling the man that the scariest part of his Bankai isn't how long it is, nor how destructive it is. Instead, it's the speed at which it extends and contracts. Ichigo thinks that Gin was bluffing by slicing the town in half originally, attempting to use the Bankai's sheer scale and power to distract Ichigo from what he should be really paying attention to. Of course, Ichigo is technically half right. The fact is, he's deduced everything about Gin's Bankai already. Everything Gin wanted him to pick up on at least anyway. Ichigo's powers of observation are undoubtedly impressive, and Gin himself is pleased with Ichigo's progress. But the truth is that Gin's Bankai is still only being showcased in the way he wants it to be. But as Gin then thinks to himself that Ichigo is only going to get stronger from here, this is our first real hint that there's something else at work in this battle. Gin muses that Ichigo has a long way to go, but to what? Regardless, Gin seemingly concedes defeat, submitting to Ichigo's deductive skills, and decides to teach Ichigo a little something else about his Bankai as a result. Clapping his hands, Gin reveals his Bankai extends 500 times faster than that, explaining that Kamishini no Yari isn't the longest Zanpakuto, but the fastest. It seems Ichigo hasn't really learned anything from the initial Bankai reveal, as once again he buys into this absurdly arbitrary, enormously high number without question. However, as Ichigo prepares himself, the two swing their blades at each other once more, disappearing in an explosion of dust. One thing I really do love about this fight is that there's a sense that it's quite basic in a weird way, though of course I mean that as a good thing here. It reminds me a lot of the earlier fights of the Soul Society arc in a time before weird and wacky abilities were the norm. Yes, Gin's Zanpakuto comes with a host of abilities of its own, but they all relate in some way to simple swordplay. This is very much a no-frills battle in that sense. Compared with both Aizen and Tosen, both of whom ascended to greater heights in their own way, Gin is still just a Shinigami, albeit an exceptionally skilled one. Later, as Aizen explains the true power of the Hogyoku to Isshin, Gin's Bankai comes soaring past them as Ichigo is slammed into a nearby building. Emerging from the smoke and the debris, Ichigo forces Kamishini no Yari away from him as the sword vanishes, returning to Gin's side. Ichigo leaps down to where his opponent is, Gin mockingly congratulating Ichigo for stopping his Bankai. Ichigo tells a concerned Isshin that he's close to dealing with Gin, while Gin apologises to Aizen for interrupting his conversation with Isshin. As everyone witnesses the Hogyoku beginning to restructure Aizen's soul, his evolution is suddenly halted by a blast through the back. Kisuke Urahara has arrived. For now, Ichigo and Gin pump the brakes on their fight and spend a bit of time watching the spectacle unfold as Urahara battles a transforming Aizen. After Yoruichi arrives as well and Aizen has been enveloped in the Hogyoku's cocoon proper, Ichigo continues to watch, now in dumbfounded horror at the monstrosity taking shape before him. As Aizen attacks Yoruichi, a huge explosion rips through the cityscape. Ichigo looks on when suddenly he hears a voice behind him. Gin has returned, noting that he's right behind Ichigo with a cheeky smirk. Distracted, Ichigo turns clumsily to face Gin, but his opponent just isn't interested in a fight anymore. Taking a seat on the rubble, Gin suggests that they take a break and just watch the fighting unfold. Gin tells Ichigo that it's inevitable now. Their defeat, that is. He's been with Aizen for a long time, but he's never seen whatever this is before. On the side, though, Gin mutters that Aizen absorbed the Hogyoku without telling him too, though, so he shouldn't be surprised that they're keeping secrets from each other now. This is an interesting moment. Beforehand, it seemed like Gin was gauging Ichigo's skill and power, hoping he'd be able to take down Aizen should the need arise. Of course, Gin is planning on killing Aizen using his Bankai when his guard is down, but should he fail, he needs Ichigo to be in a position to take over from him. The old Ichigo was slowly reaching those heights as Gin was goading him onwards, but now that Aizen has successfully begun to evolve, perhaps there really is no hope. It's difficult to tell if Gin now thinks Ichigo doesn't stand a chance at all, or if he needs to push him even harder. Of course, Gin is judging all of Ichigo's responses. This entire scenario is one big test. Gin tells Ichigo that they're all going to die, to which Ichigo stereotypically responds that he won't let that happen, though his conviction is definitely not there. Gin simply grins, saying he thought Ichigo might say that. There's a part of Gin that seems pleased that Ichigo hasn't completely given up yet on the surface. At the very least, he's retaining his baseline heroic qualities, even if they're just manifesting as empty platitudes right now. And yet, it's Ichigo's next comment that sets Gin off. Ichigo says to Gin that with Aizen the way he is now, anything could happen to Gin too. It's definitely a fascinating dialogue. Ichigo seems to think that Gin is hedging his bets on the wrong guy, noting that Aizen is now powerful enough to turn on Gin if he so chooses, but Gin takes Ichigo's words as an admission. An admission that he can't beat Gin, and certainly can't defeat Aizen. Gin wonders then if Ichigo has already given up, and of course he's right. Ichigo can still sense Aizen's spiritual pressure, and deep down, yes, he has realised they don't stand a chance. But of course, in that truth lies their key to victory. So it's likely that Gin is more annoyed with Ichigo's admission than anything else, aware that he's the only other one who can get the job done now Aizen is so strong. Gin approaches Ichigo, resolving to kill him rather than let Aizen waste his time on him. Placing his sword to his chest, Gin activates a new ability of his Bankai, Buto, which instantly unleashes the blade in a perfect straight line like a sniper's shot, or more thematically, a snake pouncing on its enemy, before immediately returning it to its shortened state once again. As Ichigo attempts to figure it out, Gin releases Buto Renjin, which is essentially the same thing except it blasts Ichigo with a Gatling gun flurry of blade stabs instead, forcing the boy to conjure his hollow mask in order to escape the attack. Ichigo soars into the air above Gin, only narrowly avoiding the blast, and the two continue their duel. Meanwhile, an injured Izuru begins to wake up and calls out to Gin before noticing Matsumoto making her way through the city streets. Although these two characters are both related to Gin himself, they don't have an impact on the outcome of this particular fight. Matsumoto won't return until a little closer to the very end of the arc itself. As chapter 405 begins, we see Gin standing tall over a thoroughly defeated Ichigo. Fresh blood runs from the end of Shinso, implying Gin managed to land another hit on him, shattering Ichigo's mask in the process. As Gin wonders if maybe Ichigo was always this weak, he notes though that the boy was a lot scarier during their first clash in the Soul Society arc. Ichigo looks ready to say something in response, but instead has nothing but a pitiable look on his face, the fight and the fire long gone from his eyes. To an extent, it's probably fair enough. This has almost certainly been the longest day of Ichigo's life. He already died once a few hours ago. Disappointed though, Gin simply tells Ichigo to run away. It kind of feels like at this point that Gin is almost desperately trying to draw out Ichigo's true power. If Ichigo does just turn tail and run, it'll confirm all of Gin's worst suspicions about him, but he knows he won't. Ichigo isn't quite that far gone just yet, but things definitely look bad. As Aizen unleashes another incredible attack, Ichigo turns to look, terrified of what's happening to the others. Once again, Gin is astonished that Ichigo would simply turn his back on his enemy when he's right in front of him like that, telling the boy that it's all over for him. And in Ichigo's current state of mind, it certainly is. Gin admonishes Ichigo, asking him if he really thinks he can defeat Aizen in his incomplete state. Again, Ichigo looks to open his mouth, but he just can't find the words. He knows the truth that he believes in his heart. Aizen is just way too powerful. It's so fascinating here, the way Gin is semi-training Ichigo despite them being on opposite sides, despite them being in the midst of a battle. Gin is trying to get Ichigo into the right place, into the right frame of mind. When he's asking him if he thinks he can defeat Aizen, it isn't a villain being mocking, it is Gin genuinely asking him that question, being like, are you giving your very best right now? Disgusted, Gin tells Ichigo to leave once again, asking if he's afraid of Aizen. He then asks if Ichigo has actually sensed Aizen's power, and here we see that Gin has caught on before anyone else, a full chapter prior to Isshin also realising the truth. Ichigo's wordless reaction is more than enough confirmation. Ichigo is indeed terrified of Aizen because he can sense his power. And that puts him on the same level as Aizen. Gin's ultimate suspicions were right. Ichigo can defeat Aizen, but right now he's just not mentally capable of it. Seemingly desperate, now that he knows Ichigo can in fact sense Aizen's power, to draw Ichigo's own power out by whatever means, Gin threatens to kill Ichigo right here and now, but they're interrupted by an enormous explosion as Aizen arrives on the scene, the unconscious bodies of Urahara, Yoruichi and Isshin falling from the sky around him. Gin is officially out of time, and Aizen suspects foul play. Questioning Gin on what he was doing to Ichigo, Gin merely replies that he was just testing the boy, with a simple smirk before Aizen decides to leave, heading for the real Karakura Town after so very long. Aizen's guard is still down, as is obvious with the way he doesn't follow up the fact that he clearly suspects Gin of treachery. But is it too late to be able to kill him? And so that's it for Ichigo versus Gin. Like I said, it's a weird fight, but I enjoy it all the same. Of course, we all know that despite Gin failing to draw out Ichigo's true strength in time, his legacy would still be carried out thanks to the combined efforts of Isshin and Zangetsu, both of whom help Ichigo reach the state necessary to defeat Aizen in time to save Karakura, helping Gin enact his revenge even after he's dead. The main question that lingers though, as we wrap this battle analysis up and my voice is totally disappearing, is, was this a worthy fight for Gin himself? Considering Gin is such a popular character, people had been dying to see him truly let loose for years. And even here, despite using his Bankai, it never really feels like he quite gets there. Of course, Gin is only testing Ichigo, he's goading him, trying to lead him, and as such is never really trying to kill him. But, while that's cool narratively, is that satisfying for fans of the character? The issue with Gin is that he's not really invested in this conflict at all. The only thing he cares about is Rangiku, and to that end bringing Aizen down. As such, we don't actually see Gin trying to kill anyone until he attempts to assassinate Aizen. And to be fair, we see how quickly and effectively Gin can topple even a godlike figure at that point. I think we get enough of a look at how Gin fights to appreciate how skilled he really was. He was considered a prodigy after all. And sure, while it would have been nice to see him going all out in order to actually try and kill someone, that's also just not really in his character. Despite being depicted as a cold-blooded, heartless snake, willing to devour anyone and anything, Gin is actually often portrayed as being aloof, and above most of the fighting actually taking place. The fact that Gin got to battle Ichigo and remain completely in control of the fight the entire time, in my opinion, speaks volumes of how much respect Kubo had for the character, and to this day, I respect the way Kubo utilised Gin's sly nature to deliver the most unique Bankai reveal in the series. Anyway, that's it for our latest Bleach Battle Analysis. As always, I really hope you enjoyed it and got some value out of it. I apologise once again for the bare bones background, and also for the fact that I appear to now be losing my voice, which is absolutely wonderful. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Did you like this fight? Was it a fitting fight for Gin at the end of his character lifespan? How do you think this fight could have gone differently? And did you like Gin's Bankai and the way it was portrayed? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, I want to give a huge shout out and end the video by saying a massive thank you to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon. I really do appreciate each and every one of you so very much, and I couldn't do this without your support. If you like what I do here over on YouTube and you want to support me over on Patreon as well, you can do just that to get your name in the credits like this and to get every video I release absolutely ad-free. Alright guys, but until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.